Thanks so much for joining me on the Voice of Job Seekers. Once again, this is Mark, your host. If you have any questions about me or the podcast, you can go to voiceofjobseekers.com, have a bio there. The other shows, there's a lot of other content. But mostly, if you really want to get involved in the show, there's a speaker pipe button on the right-hand side of the site in red where you can just leave a comment, or if you have a question, or maybe you like to be a client for it. That's fine too. Hopefully everything is going really well with you. Getting ready for the holidays, and it's possible that I might be releasing only one show this month, but I'll come back with a trifecta in December. I'll come back with 3 other shows. So the reason is that I got an influx of work. So I've got to dedicate some time to that. It's possible that I might do a little short show in a couple of weeks, but we'll see how that goes. But in the meantime, again, you can always press what they call the send voicemail button and right hand of your screen and leave a message. And you can also email feedback to me at mark@thevoiceofjobseekers.com. Just want to introduce this show, but I also want to tell you about the annual free guide that I have, 320 modern job search tips for 2020. Last year, I did 219, and basically what I did was I added some more from last year, because last year there were a lot of good tips that are still relevant. In fact, for the last 3 years, 2017, 18, 19. So I kept them all in one place so that you would have access to all of it. Now, if you know me, I just don't provide 320. There's a whole lot more than that. But 320 was a good marketing number. Anyway, what you could do to get it is you could sign up on the site. It's on the first page, very top, in blue, in black and white. And you can't miss that. In the newsletter, once you sign up for that, you'll get a link when it's available. You go to that link, and then you'll sign up again. And I'm doing it that way only because not everybody's going to want it. A lot of people are satisfied with 2018, but you definitely want to get the 2018 and 19. You definitely want to get the 2020 edition. A lot of great information there. I added probably close to 120 more tips to that. So in essence, this is the 3rd edition, and this year I'm calling it an ebook as opposed to e-guide because it's 100 pages. It's huge. Anyway, I wanted you to have this for free, but you got to sign up for it. Again, come to thevoiceofjobseekers.com. This week, you're going to hear an interview I did last March with Virginia Franco of the Resume Storyteller podcast. She has a lot of great guests on there, and some of the familiar guests, voices that you've heard in this podcast, even from the past. So that's pretty cool. Had a great time with her, and she's turned out to be a friend. It was a good interview, and we had a great time. So it was 45 minutes of goodness. Hopefully you enjoy it. Come back and listen out. Subscribe on iTunes. Subscribe to the newsletter. That's it. All of it's free. I'm not asking you to buy anything. You guys have a great week. Possibly you'll see me in a couple of weeks. Possibly not. May not see me till December, where I'll release 3 of them in a row, likely. Have a great week.
Welcome to Resume Storyteller with Virginia Franco, bringing you interviews with industry experts and regular folks who tested the job search waters and succeeded, and strategies to tell your story and land you job interviews in 60 days, guaranteed. Here's your host, Virginia Franco.
Hi guys, I am so excited to have this next guest. I've been a fan for a long time. I have with me Mark Anthony Dyson, who is the founder of the award-winning Voice of Job Seekers blog and podcast. As a job seeker advocate and a career consultant, his advice has been featured all over the place. Fast Company, Money Magazine, Glassdoor, Business Insider, many, many more. He has written more than 500 articles on job search and served hundreds of clients from all walks of life. Mark, thank you so much for joining me and welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor.
So you just heard the brief introduction that I gave, but I would love for you to, share with me how you came to be in this role.
Good question. Well, I had to promote myself throughout time, give myself a little promotions. Eventually I made it to career consultant. But I started out with a resume company, which I began to, I had a lot of work, and I had 2 contracts. I was working with a large entity that actually had federal clients that included the Army. And so I got a huge exposure to writing federal resumes and civilian resumes as well. So I think to a great degree, every career coach should have some experience in writing resumes, so you can really get some insight as to how people struggle and what they really struggle with. Reviewing them is just a small part. You want to try writing them and writing in a way that promotes them and markets them the best. You'll learn a ton, but yeah, I did. And had a lot of clients that way. I worked with another organization that was based out of Chicago that was doing really well. So I had lots of clients, but then I got this idea in my head and felt that I'm going to shift away from writing resumes. And so I decided that I would try some other route, and I ended up doing just consulting for a while, which, consulting is great one-on-one, but that kind of is a little boring to me. But consulting, but that's something that I need to go through. So after more than 200 plus clients and so on, I decided to tail off consulting. Now, these days, I have a couple that I've signed on recently, but it wasn't because I pushed that particular part of the service. What I love doing is writing career advice for the hundreds and thousands that I do write for on the platforms that I do write for, like PayScale and Recruiter.com and all those. Even though those aren't necessarily that pays my mortgage, it gives me the return of people finding me and then asking me about my services. So that's pretty much, the short of it to date. But I do love writing the most out of all the things that I do, more so than the podcast. The podcast is fun to do, but the writing is really where the magic.
You're a writer at heart.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've been following your writings for years now. I actually wanted to spend this time talking about an article that came out last month in March. It was in PayScale, and it was the title "Beyond the Resume: Strategies to Get You Hired in 2019." And you make the point in the article that a great resume does set you apart, but that it's really that's only a piece of the equation when it comes to success in the job hunt. So what I'd love to do is ask you a little bit about some of the points you brought up, and spend the rest of the time just diving through that article and get your thoughts on some things.
Okay.
So one of the things that you mentioned in the article, you advise job seekers to ask who the best person might be to follow up with, who and when. What strategies do you suggest to help job seekers walk that fine line between being persistent and patient? They want to be proactive, but they don't want to appear to be a pest. How do they accomplish that?
Well, in listening to your show, I don't want to supersede the advice that's been given, which has been great, is you get the opportunity to ask that question at the end of the interview. You get to ask, well, when should I follow up? and even ask how often should I follow up if I don't hear from you guys. But I think, there's a difference between calling the company 5 times in 5 days. That's being a pest. You definitely don't want to do that as far as the post interviews, where it's critical for you to really make an impression, especially the follow up. That counts as part of the interview, believe it or not. And there's a difference between 5 times and 3 weeks. That's being persistent. And of course, even you might want to feel that 5 times in 3 weeks might be a little bit much, but sometimes that might be a little necessary, depending on your answer. But you should also be a little concerned if an employer asks you to call until you reach someone or until you get an answer. I've had someone have to do. They say, yeah, just call every day until you get somebody. I'd be a little cautious of that, because that sends a message that I think the employer didn't want to say, is that, yeah, we're kind of goofy and unorganized too. Just call until you get someone. So, I think even at that, after you've made contact and so forth, are the times when you want to think follow up and follow up and understand what that means and agreeing with that person what that follow up call is going to entail. So there, I think there's a difference between being a pest and being persistent.
Yeah. So you let them give you direction on what follow up looks like and the volume of it, I guess, or how much persistence
you can try
to put behind it. Yeah.
Yeah, you can
That's really
try.
That's good advice.
Because sometimes they don't know what follow-up is. And honestly, most people and most employers that put people in front of you are not necessarily skilled interviewers.
No, that's true.
Depending on the workplace, like I was a floor manager in a call center, and we did lots of interviews, but of course we had 23 customer service reps and several operators. So that had to be managed a little bit differently than, let's say, a very professional position. You're used to working with executive clients, so that's going to be a lot different. The turnover is not going to be great, so that person may have interviewed maybe once in 2 years, maybe once in 3 years. So,
right,
that's not going to be, it's not going to be the same skill set in the long run.
No, I agree with that. That's good advice. So another piece that caught my mind in your article was the CPR mindset that you subscribe to. C standing for courage, P for persistence, and R for resilience. And you indicated that these are sort of invaluable intangibles. And what I'd love to get your take on is how can job seekers best convey CPR to hiring managers during the job search process?
Yeah, I think those are things that people, when they see it, they recognize it as opposed to what they particularly look for. But it is something that is noticeable and visible once it's seen. There's multi-layers to the interview process these days. Very often now would be the initial call to, after you apply to perhaps feel you out. Sometimes they ask out of the ordinary questions. I had a client that the first question the person asks, okay, what do you want for salary? It's like, that's not part of it. Now,
no, and that happens all the time, right?
Right. Yeah. My client fortunately had prepared himself. He knew exactly what the salary was, but he wasn't going to tip his hand immediately, which was, I didn't coach him on that part. He thought about all the things that we talked about. but and which included at first part was in preparing him for the interview process was to go through, what is his ideal salary and getting enough intel there at the beginning, so that when he was asked that question, he didn't expect it. It kind of took him off guard, but he didn't tip his hand, like I was saying. So, but that takes a little courage. It takes a little chance, because
to stand up and not, and not answer those kinds of questions, but direct the interview in a way that still gets you to the next level.
The person had on the other side of the phone says, "Well, I can't go any further," and he says, "I know that your minimum salary is this." I said, "We can start there." And she begrudgingly went on because, he had already blown her cover, so to speak. But I think it does take a little bit of boldness to be able to thwart some of these awful approaches at times.
Yeah.
So I think that's where some of the courage comes in. And the persistence is just not letting up. And not giving up, because it can be tedious. It can wear you out. And I think I started to say the first call is the preliminary call, and sometimes the second call is that video call or that second interview call where they're actually asking you questions that are related to to the position that you're applying for. And then after you pass all that, and you even do an assessment in between that, either a behavioral assessment or depending upon the position, it may require you to do a lot of project management, so you may have to be tested in that kind of way. And then you see a live person, in which
right. No, it's true,
and it takes a little bit of resilience to wade through all of those waters, and for the most part, most people barely tread water. When it comes to going through all of it, and you have to be patient as well. So, if you've interviewed in the past, like in the 80s or 90s, you might get hired right after that first interview.
Yeah, so, maybe 2 or 3, but none of this 5 or 6 rounds of interview stuff.
Right. But employers want to be sure that they want to ensure the investment as much as they possibly can. So in between that, it doesn't all just start with the phone calls, and they're looking online. They're looking at the different components of your social channels. So you have to be willing to go through all that. So I don't know what you're finding. And I haven't been listening closer than I normally have been, but the last that I found was about 45 to 60 days for hire, which is extraordinary compared to the past. But I think it's just profession and, their particular processes.
Yeah, no, I feel like the hoops are still there. Any job search shortening that's happening is because job seekers are getting savvier about networking to get right to the interview versus the applying online piece.
Right.
But it definitely takes a lot of grit, a lot of resilience, and certainly courage, because this is a different world than it was, 20 years ago, for sure. Right. So speaking of, you mentioned doing your homework, getting some intel to get those, for one, a sense for the salary range. You mentioned in that same article that job seekers have to go beyond the About Us page of a company website to really get intel on a company. There's lots of different avenues that you can explore. Where do you feel like, what are the avenues that give someone the best return on their investment to really get the scoop?
I think it's a sum of a lot of different places. I don't think it's just one. I think talking to employees of the company is some of the best intel you could possibly get.
Yeah.
It's in many ways it's better than Glassdoor,
I
where
think so
you read reviews, and that helps. But talking to someone that's an employee, talking to past employees are great resources as well. where you get an idea of why they left. Maybe it was that position, or maybe it was something else driving them away from the company. You get a chance to find out what that really is. I think the news can tell you a small part of the story, how much they're in the news and maybe why. Reading Yelp reviews, depending upon what type of profession it is, and I'm sure you have all types that are listening to the program. Company newsletters give you a little insight as to the culture. Are they lifting up themselves, or are they lifting up their employees? I mean, that could tell you quite a bit.
That's telling. You're right.
And you can also look at the company competitors. Are they collaborating with some of the competitors, or is it adversarial? Is it hostile? That can give you some insight to what the company culture is on the inside of the company that you're applying for. Those kind of interactions can very much drive why the company puts out the propaganda that they do. So there's several ways of, I think that you shouldn't count out anything that you hear.
Multi-pronged approach.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's the only way. If you've only looked at the company website, of course, that's something that they control. How about the dialogue that they can't control or that they can't modify? That will tell you a big story, and you can decide on the consistencies along with some conversation.
That's right. At least it does give you a fuller picture. I mean, because even Glassdoor, you either get people that are super irate or perhaps paid ambassadors to go on there.
Yeah. I mean, you could trust your gut. Because that's really a large part of this anyway, right? You're trusting your instincts and everything that you hear and what people are telling you, and there's sometimes there might need to be some risk taking. When it's an environment where some people thrive in an environment where there's a little chaos. You can't discount that either.
Yeah, you're right. And so you're right. The answers that you hear need to resonate with who you are, what you're looking for, all of that. And so getting that picture can help you to inform your gut.
Yeah, it might be the very problem that you can solve.
That's right. You're right. Very good. So one of the things that you wrote about, which I loved, was flipping the conversation and having a chance to interview the interviewee or interviewer, I guess. When do you feel like is the right time? How do you know when it's the right time in the interview process to start asking questions? Do you wait until they say, what questions do you have for me? Or is there a time when it makes sense to start interjecting and taking a little bit of control in the conversation?
Well, I think maybe probably to diffuse some of the innuendo that might go along with flipping. It's not when you say, "Well, I'm now the boss," and you get to ask questions. Of course, most interviews they provide an opportunity at the end, but there's also a way to interject comments in a way that can create conversation opportunities. During a conversation, like for instance, just as something as simple as an employee will give a spiel about the company and say, "Yeah, we're like a family here." A very simple question is, "Okay, give me some examples of how you're family." You mentioned that. I just need to see. I like hearing those kind of stories. In other words, you want to hear, are they really family, or is it something just to sell you some goods? And that can also, to do too much at the end, it can set a bad impression. But to build a conversation during the interview no longer makes it an interview; it makes it a conversation. It should be more. It should be more of a talk show, less of the Spanish Inquisition.
I love that. So get them to elaborate. You're right. That's what talk show hosts do.
Yeah. Get them to elaborate. Get them to, and it's not that you're taking on the part of the facilitator, but you're kind of really just building on what the facilitator is asking you. And you should also be able to answer in a way that will elicit responses. And, there's something to be said to going on interviews after you've been in multiple interviews. You pretty much have mastered some of what kind of responses you'll get to some of the ways that you respond. So you can leverage that to create a conversation around so that the interview doesn't seem like a burden for both people.
That's right. Gosh, maybe just watch a lot of talk show interviews. Practice.
Well, and that's not a bad thing. There's
a lot of Oprah.
A lot of Oprah, but also there's some self-awareness. And again, is that you've gained some intel as to you've gone out networking, you've done all those things, hopefully you have, to where what are the most interesting parts of what you have as far as being able to prove to an interviewer that you're the right person.
Right.
And hopefully as well is that you also know where it all stops. And you know what doesn't trigger a response where it could be perceived as being negative. And even if you need to say, you may not walk away in the middle of the interview, but if you've concluded, during the interview that by what they're saying and during the conversation that they're not the one, that they can't carry a conversation, maybe they aren't the right ones for you.
That's right. It's very telling. I agree. So one of the points from that article, I couldn't believe how many questions I had from a 800-word article. You talk about that people are weaving their interests and hobbies more and more into their career marketing collateral. And I know a lot of people struggle with where are the best places to share this information and when is it appropriate? When should you keep your personal and your professional life separate? And I don't know if that's a generational thing or situational, but I'd love to get your take on that.
I think there are times when you need to consider what's relatable and what's going to, get engagement, so to speak. And engagement, I'm not talking about 50 comments on a particular thread, but at least intrigue interest into who you are as a person. And you've got to kind of figure out and maybe even try and tweak sometimes your profile to where you can include your interest or maybe some people include snarky comments on their profile, but sometimes they're brilliant. You can't always tell a person by how they really are until they get an idea of of who you are and what you do. So I think the depth you got to think about. Does it create depth of the conversation? Is it applicable to what you do? If it isn't, it still might be interesting. But you'll see people these days that say, I do this, but I also like these aspects. And that second line is often what catches my eye personally. But if it doesn't turn people off, it might be good for the conversation. So that's what I ultimately mean is just creating more intrigue and interest.
And do you feel like, I'm thinking of LinkedIn. Is that something that you encourage people to weave into their summary at the very top to give someone a flavor of who they are in a way that you don't always when you're just, sharing your professional bio?
Yeah, I think that people can take an opportunity to, like I said, it's an opportunity to intrigue and make people want to go look at your profile. That's ultimately the first step of real engagement. A good example of that I'm just trying to think, Andy Foote. I'm just going to go to this, and I think you and I are friends with him.
Yeah.
He writes a lot about LinkedIn profiles, but he doesn't concentrate that. And shout out to Andy Foote. Be sure we mention him.
Shout out, yeah.
But he writes, the reason I'm not smiling, I've seen too many awful LinkedIn profiles today.
Yep.
That's all it says. Now, and
it's a little bit of personality.
There's a little bit of personality. It tells a lot about what it does. And then when you go to his profile, you don't even have to scroll down. You can see, this person writes about and consults about LinkedIn profile. So in that way, it's a little bit of personality, a little bit of himself and what he does, all in very two short sentences. He doesn't even take the 125 character limit to do that.
Right. And he writes, as a child moving from one city to another because my father robbed banks / commanded tanks for a living while serving in the armed cavalry. Yeah, that's funny. You're right. It's just a little bit, it's humorous.
Yeah. So, it's an opportunity. By no means it's going to change the game entirely. But the whole idea is that you can't be unseen and to be a viable candidate or to get employers interested. You have to be interesting, and you have to be seen.
And it's an opportunity for the reader to hear your voice.
Yes.
In a way that they wouldn't otherwise. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. So next question, a little bit of a shift. You have advised job seekers to create their own professional user's manual. Can you elaborate? What's it look like? When and how do you share it?
Well,
what is it?
Well, the whole idea is that it really it's for the person themselves. I don't think it's necessarily shared, but you create it, but I want to give people the idea is that how do you do stuff? What is your thought process? I had a client once that actually wrote her own training manual for her position that the company continued to use after she left.
Yeah.
And it's public. But what's nice about it is that they continued to give her credit for it. It built an online presence as to what she could do, her writing skills, her abilities. And obviously, she became an expert at that position. And the whole idea is that the only way you're going to be approved, well, I shouldn't say the only way, but one of the ways that for you to kind of have a reference point is to kind of have your own manual on how you can do stuff. It could be in Evernote. It can be on a blog. It can be on it could be on a YouTube channel, but in some way be able to document, okay, this is how I do stuff. And it's not about giving when you're good to competition. It's showing employers what your competency is and how deep it is. Right. And they can gather information regarding that. So, maybe even if they decide to hire you for contract, they know you can write that manual. If it's that kind of way.
It's almost like a playbook. Here's my playbook for this, that, or the other. Okay.
Yes, it is. It's kind of your own personal playbook on how you do stuff. And you are the expert on you. And you might have several playbooks. And it might be even overtime. And I think it was kind of a different way to say to have your own blog, to have your own website, things that we encourage people to do that. But I think to have your own playbook or to have your own manual is a way to get people involved in their own outcomes. So let's say they got to a certain point in their ability to do a job for a particular employer. They may decide they want to continue that manual on for the next employer. Say, I can't wait to show you what I like to do because I can tell you a couple of things I like to do next based on what I've done for other people.
I love that. And even if you only share it once, by creating that, you have helped cement in your head how you get things done. It allows you to answer behavioral questions with, this was the challenge that was presented to me. This is the action I took, and here was the result. Over and over again, you have tons of examples because you've taken the time to outline your user manual.
Absolutely. And I've said before in other interviews, and I truly believe, I've written articles about this, is that the future of a job seeker is just being a consultant. And being a consultant, you're selling what you've done with other clients and the result that you've achieved, what you'll bring to this client and how you tweak it for them. That's ultimately what you're presenting in the opportunity. And, that's the question that they won't spend time on a whole lot of other stuff, or the peripheral stuff. They'll be interested in how you'll be able to tweak it for them, and is it a viable business option for both of them?
Yeah, I agree. What can you do for them? Show them.
Yep, absolutely.
One of the things that you mentioned was that, you talked about networking, and that the best referrals came not from people you knew really well, but the people that you don't know very well, which sort of that intrigued me. And I'd love to hear from you. What does the roadmap look like for someone who is trying to make connections with people that they don't know very well?
Well, again, you can use this towards any social platform, but LinkedIn is one that we talk about all the time.
Yeah.
Almost all day long now in our industry, and in many industries, it is the go-to place for connections and second and third place connections without the noise that Twitter and Facebook often presents. But you make that initial contact, and usually that's the easy part. You write someone a note saying that this is why I like to contact you. We have similar interests, and I like what you said in the comments earlier, or I like what your profile said. I just have to connect with you. You make the connection. And then that's how
you and I met. You're right.
Yeah. So, and then you become familiar with that person. Now, I'm not saying this is going to take a week or two. It may take a year. It may take a year or years. It may take some months. It depends. It depends on interest. If you're on LinkedIn once a week, I would say a year is a good time to get familiar with someone. Honestly, I really do. I mean, it's going to vary. Each person's going to make that decision a little bit differently. But yeah, it takes me some time to get to know someone if they're not on there all the time. But if they're on there all the time, like me and you, then of course that accelerates it. But you've got to be wise and use that time. So let's say it does take a year. Let's say it does take 2 years. Then there might be a stage where you might be able to collaborate with that person. Now, the collaboration part really is not just 101, it's 102. It's kind of an advance, in a way, it's an advanced but very natural way to have the relationship evolve. The collaboration could be just on a conversation that you had in a group, or it could be that maybe you referred someone else by way of that connection.
Right.
It could be, the collaborations could look in a lot of different ways. You and I are collaborating through this podcast interview. You and me. And I mean, that's a collaboration. So then that really 10 times it, doesn't it? It kind of puts them in position. Wow, now I have familiarity. I have a relationship with that person. So it's not a problem in seeking them. And let's say that there's some time space. For instance, I had, I won't mention her name, but out of the blue, she said, "Hey, let's catch up. We haven't caught up in a while." I said, okay, I hadn't talked to her one-on-one in a long time, but we interact and we've shared each other's content throughout time. And so, Anne's one of our colleagues. I'll tell you off the script. But
okay.
But it was just how we hadn't talked in a long time, and we had a great conversation in that kind of way. So I feel very comfortable now on a personal level. Once you get to that collaboration, relationship, personal level, then you become known. Then your ask can be a little bit deeper. Like, for instance, hey, you used to work for so-and-so. Do you know anyone I can, that you can introduce me to? Or even like a salary question, say, hey, what type of, what type of salary this position do you think that they're asking about? Do you have any insight, or maybe you know someone? Those kind of questions. So the deeper the ask, you can pass all the different obstacles that you wouldn't have before without those particular contacts. So that's one way of looking at it. There's other ways of looking at it. And probably I took the long way of explaining
I love that. No, you made some really good points. I agree with you. I think, I like all different social media for different reasons, but I do feel like LinkedIn is a great place to make those more surface level connections to begin with, in a way that's a little harder on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
But you can, by building those what at the beginning may feel like surface level connections through sort of one-off collaborations, they can then, it can springboard beyond the platform and turn into a professional relationship where those bigger asks can happen comfortably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. And I think that's ultimately is the relationship that ultimately matters. And of course, we can't have a relationship with all 500 plus of our contacts.
Yeah.
But we can grow familiarity and venture relationship with 10 of those contacts within a year's time, which you have to be kind of on a track to where you're thinking that you're going to, tomorrow's not promised, and that you're going on the fact that companies could drop out of sight at any moment without any promise to you in the future. So you want to be ready. And that's any employer we've learned in the past. I was watching something.
No, that's true. I
was watching something on about Enron the other night. I think it was on NBC or something or another. That was sudden. I mean, you think about it, maybe it built for a few years, but really, when it all went down fast.
Hard, yeah. Or what happened with the banks during the recession? My gosh.
Right. Or
years in the making, but it crumbled. Yeah.
or what happened with 911? You know what I mean? The businesses that disappeared.
Literally.
Literally disappeared. I was working for the American Bar Association at the time of 9/11. And there were groups of attorneys that had, their firms in the World Trade Center. And there were more than 40 of them that just disappeared off the net.
Yeah.
It wasn't a matter of filing anything. They all had fatal results as a result of the attacks. So, you just never know. And so you should always be prepared.
And a platform like this, it helps you to be prepared. The more you put in, the more you're going to get out.
Absolutely.
That's what I always advise. Well, one topic I want to ask you about briefly is age discrimination when it comes to hiring practices. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the topic. And my sense is that the approaches that you and I have talked about are the best way to mitigate age discrimination, but I'd love to hear what kind of advice you give clients about that.
Right. I've written several articles for careerpivot.com. And it wasn't just necessarily ageism. I think, discrimination against women. Race discrimination.
There's lots of barriers. There's lots of barriers to employment.
Yes, there are a lot of barriers. Not necessarily people often who don't want to talk about it, think that people don't intentionally do it. Well, I think that's part of the point, though, is that there's a bias, and we'll call it unconscious bias, towards it. And ageism is one that affects everybody because we all said at one point, someone's too old to understand.
Yeah.
So
age is non-discriminating in how it discriminates. Everyone gets on.
and some point people have said they're too young to understand. And
right.
For the past few years, it's they're too old to understand that actually has been the target of ire, because that's happened.
Right.
Because of it is what it is. So I think people who you could follow some of the same strategies and look for companies that would look more like you and that would invite you in. So it's going to take a little bit more research. Who is promoting people your age and your position? Who is putting them out there as brand ambassadors? Who's bragging about their companies that are older and that are using these tools? Those are the ones you can use to kind of gain a little intel and start to ask some questions. Now, don't assume anything. One person bragging about a company doesn't mean that the company's all for age. Some of them are just saying, yeah, we invite all types of workers. Doesn't mean exactly what it means on the surface of things. But to start your research where people are a number of people who are really feeling welcomed and feeling like they can thrive in those environments, and look at companies like that first. Those will be your low-hanging fruits instead of just spraying and praying applications.
You mentioned earlier doing intel and asking people that have been there and left, and those are the kinds of questions that you can ask. Yeah, absolutely. And if you're concerned about it, then you should ask. And there's nothing wrong with asking if people like me are getting promoted, or are they retiring, or they're leaving. And it's okay to even if you have a little courage, as we talked about earlier, is ask in the interview that are people like me being promoted, or people like me being encouraged to go for positions that I like. If you don't get a candid answer from that person, that company may not be the company for you. Yeah, that's right. Candid answers or lack thereof. Well, I want to ask you my favorite question in closing, because I know I've taken up so much of your time already today. What is next for you? I mean, you're so prolific in your writing. I'd love to hear about what projects you have on the horizon. I'm going to wait for this one announcement. There is a major shift. No spoilers then? Yeah, a couple of major shifts. The Voice of Job Seekers is not going away. I will announce that I think I mentioned earlier, I am going to be putting a little bit of time into the YouTube channel this summer that I have, the Voice of Job Seekers. I think it might be under my name, but I think maybe 90. I think I have more, but a lot more of the podcast interviews. You can certainly catch up there, but there's also the one-on-one interviews that I'll be posting there as well. Really excited about that. This summer? Yeah, this summer, starting in June. I'll be posting more from June to about the first or second week of September, and probably a little bit after that, but a lot more videos. There'll be some where it'll be just me. There'll be interviews. There'll be happenings. So I'm looking forward to that. Trying to just grow a different presence there. Of course, there's going to be a lot of writing involved, and some of them for writing for clients. So I'm excited about that. Okay. So
So I won't be, the podcast will be on hiatus until the second week of September after June 1st.
Okay, but so, we can go to YouTube to catch up.
Yeah, so I'll say definitely. And then there is a major announcement that is imminent as all the details are going to be worked out.
Okay, and when will you announce that one?
Yeah, I don't know about when,
okay.
but it will happen.
All right. Well, if people want to learn more about you, share with us the best places to reach you.
thevoiceofjobseekers.com. That's the best place to get a hold of me. And I make it as easy as when you go to the site, there's a speak pipe button on the right. If you press that, it will activate your laptop microphone. And you can just leave me a message of anything you want to leave me a message about.
All right. All right, perfect. And then they can find you on LinkedIn as well, where you share a lot of your writings.
Absolutely. Under Mark Anthony Dyson. They can find me there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. So much good advice. I can't wait to digest all of this.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.
All right. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. This has been all right.
You've been listening to Resume Storyteller with Virginia Franco. To learn more about storytelling strategies to catch the eye of today's skim online readers, hiring and decision makers, go to www.virginiafrancoresumes.com.